Good morning, everybody. Sorry to keep you waiting. I imagined I was learning another little lesson from my teacher who was not often, but not unusually late for talks. And I was just thinking, well, I had like a what would Norman do moment, I noticed that I was going to be late, and I thought, well, I don't think he would rush. I don't think he would dawdle either. So I better get up and go to the Zendo. And I just walked across the lawn. For a while, there were people still walking down there, and then at some point there weren't. At some point I got here, and here you are. It's like, well, it's kind of like that. I forgot a few things, nothing too important. Well, seems like it's Friday. Day 7. At last, suddenly, oh yes, oh no. Sorry, what day was that again? That might be the best response. Really? Oh, okay. I was just thinking how, sometimes now I'm thinking of things that Norman didn't do, What do we learn from that? And it's actually a pretty common trope in Dharma talks at Sesshin to kind of like walk through the days, to say to the group, maybe during the talk, or maybe in the evening as we're about to go to bed, well, it's day 3, we're holding our energy, we're getting concentrated, we're focusing in. Well, it's day such and so, and giving a little bit of coaching, It's not the worst idea. We are doing something kind of unusual, and even those of us who have done it before, it's not like what we are usually doing. But Norman never did that, actually, and I don't know if he ever mentioned more than a word or two about how to actually practice Sesshin. He would have a topic in the Dharma that he was interested in exploring, and explore it with us, and we'd appreciate that. Very few, if any, that I can remember little tips about zazen or pacing yourself or taking care of yourself at Sesshin. And he certainly talked to people about this individually who would bring it up. It's not like he's like buck up, buttercup. He would give suggestions, and not in the talks. And I don't know if he consciously thought about this, but maybe it's just another example of him somehow feeling deeply. These are strong, wise, self-reliant people. They'll find their way. It'll be okay. I don't need to be the coach, And then, when he started inviting me to give the first talk, I think something in me said, oh, good. Now somebody can be the coach. Goodness gracious, this is like a hard thing. We should talk about this. What are we doing here? It'd be lovely if we're all just peaceably absorbing the Dharma, but, we're struggling, man. Like, how do we do this? So hopefully I didn't get too carried away, but I would try to give some suggestions that I thought, would be helpful. And actually, Norman giving me the first talk wasn't just like trusting me and honoring that he didn't have to give all the talks anymore. It was mostly practical. Norman often somehow had one reason or another that he couldn't come to the first day or so of the Sesshin. Even though I was very careful every year to give him the dates right away and double check that he had them. But somehow, in the intervening year, some important poetry event would come along, or a one-day sit he wanted to lead in the Bay Area. It hadn't occurred to him to get somebody to sub for him, even though he had many capable teachers down there. Happened to be on the same first Saturday. Yeah, what do you know? What do you know? Sometimes, of course, very understandable things, needing to be at the funeral for his teacher. I think that year he missed a couple of days. It was on the Sunday afternoon or something. Some I kind of had trouble deciding if I could decide whether they were justified or not. Like his granddaughter's elementary school graduation. Yes, I said elementary school. Kathy was here too, so she proceeded to educate me about how vitally important it is to have a good elementary school graduation to the future of New York school students. Like your fate is kind of cast at age 10 in the Big Apple. And you need all the support you can get. Definitely need your grandparents. But, of course, this was also just more teaching on trust, even if I sometimes didn't appreciate it. One of these messages actually came while we were in Japan. I don't know if I told anybody on the trip, but we're having one of the flexible days we had in Kyoto. And Razel and I can picture the temple. I don't remember, Nansenji maybe, one of the big Rinzai temples. I checked my phone and there was an email from Norman saying, "Oh, by the way, I'll be there late. I got this other thing I got to do." So I sat there writing an argument back. No, you need to come to Sesshin. I think there was one time I did convince him, and he did come, but 1 out of 20 or something. So anyway, he didn't talk a lot about how to practice Sesshin while it's Sesshin. I guess, yeah, he just trusted that we were figuring it out. And I'm sure that we are. Being a little obsessed with silence, I can't resist mentioning that at the moment, but I'll be brief. It's kind of easy to feel pretty comfortable towards the end sometimes, you know. And you're sitting on the bench next to some really nice person, and you both have your coffee. And it's so natural to say, "Oh, isn't this great? Yeah, it is. Where are you from again?" So, one good thing to remind yourself is, and that's not just about following rules or because some authority figure told you this is better. It's super helpful and super fun to tune in to the positive side of each of these guidelines. To ask yourself, well, what does deep silence bring me in this moment? If I didn't say, "Isn't this nice?" And my own experience, you see for yourself, but my own experience is actually to sit in deep companionable silence with somebody, totally content, totally trusting that the other and yourself don't need to say anything, is so beautiful, don't you think? It's like so lovely. And it pretty much takes like this huge apparatus and a week of sitting to make that actually possible, you know. So otherwise, right, we feel self-conscious, the silence is dragged on too long. God, what was her name again? Shit. Right? What did they tell me about their? I should have, yeah. Just to be together, you know. To feel the energy of two human bodies living and breathing. That you're feeling the sun together. Enjoying the scenery together. That's so beautiful. So it's kind of like you think about it that way, you're like, well, I don't want to kind of spoil this beautiful moment with chit-chat. There's plenty of chit-chat in the world. Let's just be together quietly. Yeah. And if you're lucky, the other person comes to the same conclusion, you can do it together. And if they say hi, of course, we're polite, Yeah, it is beautiful. Rather not talk about the other stuff. So anyway. So let's go back once again. Is the sound okay? It's a little bit lower than I've had it. Okay, I think it's kind of falling down. Is that better? I forgot my sound check.
Yes.
All right.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, you were straining to hear. You didn't hear any of that. Okay. Probably just as well. So now here's my actual talk. So let's go back to the June of 1993, our first ever retreat. I've talked a lot about the history of this retreat, but there's one thread running through it I want to bring up today, from the beginning. Florence Kaplow, of course, was here. She and I were kind of the main co-conspirators running the Bellingham Zen practice group in the first few years. Maybe you've met Florence or know her name from the wonderful book she co-wrote called The Hidden Lamp, Zen Stories Through 2 Centuries. So, of course, she was here. And Florence loved to sit. I'll never forget this. One time early on, she told me on the weekend, we were all working full time and all this, but on the weekend, she would have to bargain with herself so she'd get her chores done and not just sit all day. I remember this. I'm pretty sure she said this. That she'd say to herself, if you get the vacuuming done, then you can sit for a couple of hours. This was amazing to me. I deeply appreciate sitting, but it does not call to me in that way. Like, yeah, I can't wait, I got some time off. I'm going to sit zazen until they make me do something. So, me and Florence, we had a fuller schedule, but she wanted to sit more after the schedule. And she was sitting up late one night here in this room at our first Sesshin. And she had a shocking and horrific vision experience. We use the word vision for this kind of thing, but I don't know how visual it was exactly, if she saw things in a visual way. Or if it was more of a kind of like sudden bunch of feelings, or more somatic, a constriction, tension, heat. But she had some kind of really difficult experience. An experience of pain, horror, and suffering. She was sitting here breathing, and this thing kind of overtook her. I think after she got up and left and walked for a while, it kind of faded again, if I remember. But I doubt she slept very much that night. So she went to see Norman in the morning, and they intuited together that maybe this was an experience to do with restless spirits here at this place. Because it was our first time, practicing here. And Florence had some street cred around indigenous peoples. She'd recently married a guy, he was the lawyer, he might still be, lawyer for the Lummi tribe, really connected to the tribe. And their wedding was on the Lummi Nation's sacred lands at Madrone Point on Orcas Island, where normally non-tribal members never get to go. The officiant, most of the guests were all tribal members. They took us out there on a boat from Bellingham. It's quite an experience for me. I was kind of newish in town and going, wow, this is interesting. Wow. I remember the wedding was really long. Everyone who spoke was, in my view, really long-winded. But most of the people in the audience I was interested to see didn't feel obligated to sit there and listen to it all. They'd get up, wander outside, chat a little bit, wander back in, kind of nudge each other, different bits, And it was just a little different culture than I was used to. So Florence had some feeling of that world, at least as it expresses now. And this was long before there was much of anything posted on the walls in the dining room, so we really didn't know much about the Samish nation. And they weren't recognized by the federal government in the treaties of the 1860s. They got left out somehow, or 1880s, I guess it was. So we were kind of ignorant of where we were going. We knew it was called Samish Island, If we thought about it, we probably would have assumed that was a native name, like half the names around here, probably badly pronounced. But we didn't know much. There's one thing on the walls that is back from those days. It's a little kind of frame with some faded newspaper clippings in it, but not much information. But Florence and Norman figured this was something to do with the people who had been here. So Norman said we should do a spirit settling ceremony. If you've ever been to a hungry ghost ceremony, seigaki or seijiki, you know the kind of thing we're talking about. But if you don't, or I'll just remind you, much more sort of dark isn't the right word, but it kind of is esoteric, kind of going deep. Most of the chanting is mantras and dharanis. The officiants are invited to really kind of try to express something of what you might call the other world. Because the Zen Buddhist tradition, turns out, isn't just meditation and a way to get enlightened, although that was the story that was imported to the U.S. It absolutely includes a deep root in esoteric ritual and understanding. And we're constantly, in all the chants, talking about the 6 worlds and the 3 realms and this of that and that of this, stuff that you can't see. Right? You can't even really talk about. That it's here. The other Japanese Buddhisms actually specialize this a little more. A big ritual repertoire, mudras and mantras, interesting uses of malas. When we went to Japan, we also got to meet a great practitioner in that world. And at one point, he came around and whacked us on the head with his mala while chanting something really fast that we didn't understand to help wake us up. We were warned. Fire ceremonies done in the dark, ascetic practices, ways to kind of bend conventional reality so we could see more clearly what's beyond what we thought we could see. So we're doing something like that. We gathered together. It was a big community event. We talked about it a lot each year. We'd gather together all kinds of offerings and lay out a big table for an altar out in the field, kind of over there. We do lots of chanting. Norman was the doshi at first, of course, and he would really kind of go into his gut, into his aura, express something of our reverence, our sadness, some of the stuff I was trying to say yesterday, but like with the dial at 11, I try to keep it at 8 or 9. Maybe only a 7 or 8 yesterday. So that we can really reach these spirits, Try to offer something that might help and acknowledge that we know we're on their sacred grounds. And that we know that many of our family ancestors were involved in horrors here, even though we didn't know a lot about what those horrors were. A couple of years in, a couple joined the Sangha, Kate and Jeff McKenna, and they've been on Zoom but aren't on today, so I can talk about them more freely maybe. They could listen. Anyway, Kate and Jeff McKenna joined the Sangha. And Jeff is a white guy from Texas, but he came up here for all kinds of reasons, was adopted into one of the tribes, and has a tribal family, and has a pretty good sense through his own, conditioning for sure, but a good sense of native ways and rituals. So he'd come and help us arrange the altar, and he was really surprised. Actually, I heard this from Jeff over and over again, many different ways. He was really surprised by how similar many of the rituals and forms and ways of holding the body are to things that he had seen at tribal events. Like, for instance, when we do prostrations and hold our hands up like this is the universal gesture of gratitude and reverence in the Coast Salish people. Just the same. Just the same. Jeff said what we were doing with this hungry ghost ceremony was like a ritual they call a burning. Very similar, he said, done when there's a funeral and other important occasions. So I'm watching all this and feeling into all this, and of course, being a good person, eager helper, helping with all this, and trying to make sense of it. Because I grew up really non-religious, the son of a physicist. He'd actually go on to be a pretty prominent American physicist, living in the suburbs. I did have a groovy grandmother. That's my main inspiration for practice. She'd come back with stories of healers in Brazil and stuff like that, but for the most part, I didn't know about this stuff. In my teens, I'd definitely been loosened up a bit by experiences out in nature, with psychedelics, starting to dabble in meditation. But I didn't have any background on what the heck this was. And I was absolutely quite allergic to new agey stuff. I went to school in Santa Cruz, California, a bastion of hippie culture, and there was like a crystal shop on every corner. And people were doing healing things of all kinds, pyramids were involved. And I thought it was bunk, So I was a funny combination, I guess, of spiritually curious and narrow-minded skeptic, kind of all bundled up together, trying to feel into what the heck. And here I was, helping to call to the spirits, making offerings, apologizing for the pain, taking some responsibility for it, shouting into the wind, watching the tide. Funny how things can go, huh? And after a while, after I ordained, and Norman was by now like a full-time resident of his Dokusan hut, he said, well, you lead that stuff. I don't remember any training. And so I did, I tried to. And, I was enthusiastic about everything, so trying to do a good job. And I started noticing something. Every year, during or after or sometime in there, these ceremonies, I feel this odd feeling that I never really felt before that I could remember. Kind of a dense sort of feeling of warmth, kind of centered in my gut. It sounds pretentious to say a kind of presence, but that word did kind of come, like, what is this feeling? It didn't feel painful or bad. Maybe it was a good thing. It was the spirits, whatever the heck that is. And it would gradually fade as we walked back to the dining hall for dinner, like we did last night. And then, Sesshin is crammed full, and this is 1 hour out of many, and 1 week out of many in the year, and I'd forget all about it again until it came back around. I'm pretty sure I mentioned it to Norman at some point, this feeling, and I'm pretty sure he probably said something like, that's interesting. But I was also a little uncomfortable and kind of embarrassed about it, Am I making this up? Am I kind of trying to force myself to feel something? Am I trying to be special or spiritual or, pseudo-shamanic practitioner? So I felt a little conflicted, I think, too. But it kept coming back. Same feeling every year. And over the years, it really felt like it was getting stronger. In the meantime, I and we started learning more about the history of what happened here, based on mostly examples of very similar places. Not much is written, if anything, specifically about what happened to this village here. But it must have been like the other ones. And that learning was intense for me. Intense learning more about the degree of suffering, and that we are here because of it in many ways. Maybe sort of intensely embarrassing and a little shameful that I didn't know all this. I did grow up in the West. California native people were squashed and sidelined a little earlier because of the gold rush and stuff, but still, they were there. And I knew a little bit about native people, but mostly at an arm's length. I had a few books. I'd met an important anthropologist one time, talked about it. I remembered from school being taught something like there was these diseases that the Europeans brought, but bad luck for the natives, they didn't have any resistance to them. And it's sort of like an unhappy accident, regrettable. And then here I am, many years later, reading about smallpox. That it arrived at a particular moment on a boat in Victoria, British Columbia in 1862. And that by then Victoria had become a major trading hub. And native people would come in their canoes from up and down the coast to trade with each other and with the white people. So there were a lot of people around from the indigenous communities when smallpox arrived. And how they all left with it, too. Went back to their homes. And how quickly it spread. And then learning that this story about it being bad luck that they didn't have immunity was a half-truth at best. You get pretty sick if you're a European person in the 1860s getting smallpox, but maybe you don't die. The native people all died, pretty much. I read that the mortality was between 60 and 90% in each village. I try to get my head around these numbers. Imagine myself in a group of friends like this group, and so what, 28 people here, so 4 of us survive, maybe? 5? And I was reminded that we absolutely had a vaccine. Maybe you remember from high school biology, that thing about cows and giving them a mild version of the whatever it was, and then they strangely were surviving, and then you can take some blood from them and give it to another cow, and then that cow strangely survives. That was smallpox. And that was in the 1790s, long before contact. I read there were a few exceptions. There was at least one doctor who went to several villages on Vancouver Island administering vaccine, and as a result, those peoples did much better. But that was the exception, not the rule. So all this made me and my Sangha colleagues, at least the ones that were learning about this and talking about this with me, we got a little intense about it. It's understandable. A little messianic. I was happy to have an excuse to use messianic. Even though it's kind of a strong word, actually. People need to know about this, you know. They may have thought they signed up for a Buddhist retreat, but it turns out they're at a teach-in about Native American studies, and we need to share this with them. We weren't wrong, right? But our spirit was a little, our energy was a little bit off. And so there were a couple of years where it must have been sometimes a little uncomfortable, There's a couple of years where I think it was usually me. It was probably always me. In the Zazen period, after kind of going on maybe pretty long at the work meeting, we've had the shortest work meetings in history. Thank you, Chiriki-sama. Used to have longer work meetings, maybe even longer by all the things I wanted to say. Sometimes I go on at length at the work meeting, We're going to appreciate the sacred ground and what happened here and, genocide. Great, enjoy your work period. And that we're going to do something about it too. Please, after work, gather some things for our altar. See if you can find things that would have been here before contact, so the spirits will recognize them. Not dandelions, but Douglas fir cones. I'm sure, as I said, driven partly by guilt. Why is it we get to be here now? What have we colluded in? And it also made me reflect that, the settlers were not all evil people or anything like that. They were people just like us, just like me, trying to find a way to live. Living in a slum in the east somewhere and being offered 80 acres of free land, what would you do? By the government, must be legit. And that when they got here, given the massive depopulation from disease and the reservation system that was starting up, we'll just relocate you to this undesirable spot over here. Oh, that actually was desirable. We'll relocate you again. That happened several times. I was reading, actually, I didn't know this, that the Squamish tribe, did you know about this? I guess it happened a little while ago. The Squamish tribe in Vancouver had a similar thing. They were given all the lands along False Creek, if you've been to Vancouver, which at that point, like the city of Vancouver, didn't care about. That was out in the sticks, It's this long inlet called False Creek. And it was to be it could stay living there and actually expand their village. Their village was to become their reservation. It was called something like Kitsilano. Maybe you know of the neighborhood called Kitsilano now. So eventually the white people said, no, we want that land, you're out of here. So not too many years ago, the tribe sued and said, those are our lands. And they won. They didn't give them back the whole neighborhood of Kitsilano, full of single-family houses and retired people and stuff. But there was 10 acres of unused land not far away because it had been like a railroad switching yard or something like that, and the railroad was defunct, something like that. So the tribe got it. Right on the edge of downtown Vancouver, not too far. I was just reading about this. It's so encouraging. So what did they do? They developed high-rise housing, thousands of units, enough for all of their tribe who might want to live in the Vancouver area, and then like a couple thousand more for rentals. And they're making a lot of money as landlords. Good for them, And the article listed some of the complaints from the neighbors. And one of them, boy, I hope this person is embarrassed now to be in the New York Times saying, that's not actually indigenous housing. Anyway. So sometimes the tribes get a little back. There's a similar thing with the Nisqually people in Tacoma, actually, too. All of the port of Tacoma actually belonged to them. Anyway, but that's not the usual thing. The usual thing is like here, they're gone. And what can we as Zen students sitting here do about it? How should we feel about it? How should we practice with it? So there were a couple of years we got a little intense about it. But still, all kind of third-hand knowledge, you know. And then in the spring of 2009, the Community of Christ organized a 50th year anniversary event. The campground was founded in 1959. We were invited to come. I led a meditation. Turned out it was mostly church elders who I taught meditation to. That was cool. But the amazing thing was the Samish Nation also came. They sent several elders and younger people supporting them. And they spoke about this place. I don't remember a lot of what they said, but they spoke. And one of them was an elder named Rosie, and I actually had just heard that name a couple of months before, so that was really surprising. Our same Jeff McKenna had been to another event, and somehow I think it had to do with the Maiden of Deception Pass statue, which was made by a Samish carver, although that was carved quite a bit earlier, so I'm not sure. But anyway, he'd been to an event where Native folks were. And he's a very gregarious guy and, has kind of, an in. So he was schmoozing. He's a great schmoozer, our Jeff. And he got to chatting with elders of the Samish Nation, this woman, Rosie. He met her. She listens a little while to who he is, and, he says about Red Cedar and stuff. And she says to him, "Oh, are you the ones that have been calling to us?" And we had not called them on the phone. We had not. So that was powerful information to hear. And here she is. Here she is at Samish. I was way too shy to talk to her. But I talked to another tribal member, a woman about my age, and shared with her about this ceremony. And I think the memorial or the anniversary thing was like in May or April. And so not too long until we were going to be here. So that was good. And told her, we've been doing this ceremony for your people. We'd love for you to be there. We hope it will feel right, and we want your input. And, we'd be honored if you came. And she said yes, just right away. She didn't I'll call you. Let me check my schedule. She was like, yes, we'll be there. So she and her husband, who was from a Plains tribe of some kind, I think, both came. We did the whole thing. And they were so appreciative, I saw tears in their eyes. And like we did yesterday after our outdoor ceremony, at the end we all filed back in to get our chant books back and kind of like to return to our Sesshin space, right? That's where we did that. Have the formal exit and continue to dinner. This Samish woman, I'm embarrassed I didn't get her name or forgot it. She then stepped forward before we left and spoke to us in the Samish language, thanking us. It might have only been for a few minutes, but it felt like an eternity. That language ringing out in this room. Maybe right about where the village longhouse was, where that language was always ringing out. So then we felt like, okay, we're doing something. And then the next year, it all went a little off the rails. We were gearing up for our big usual ceremony, and it might have been the very next year, so I maybe had some feeling of inspiration from this actual encounter with actual Spanish people. And I was outside getting ready and kind of feeling into the vibe, like I was doing yesterday, although I didn't realize you were already there, so sorry you had to wait a while. Jeff was by my side. Maybe this other Zen priest from that little diaspora I was telling you about, John Bales, he might have been by my side too. He's into this kind of stuff. And this year I felt that strong gut feeling right away, and really strong. And before we could even start the ceremony, I was kind of looking out at where we had it set up, and I felt like this pull, like a string pulling at this feeling. Pulling me to another part of the grounds, kind of over closer to where they have now their like kind of compost and rubble pile. And somehow I just knew that that's where we needed to be. I just knew it. And I heard a strange sounding voice telling everybody we need to move over there, which didn't quite sound like me, but it was. Everyone kind of looked at me, I guess, and we moved. You know, they're good Zen students in silence, so. Okay. But I'm sure people were starting to wonder what's going on here. The ceremony was very powerful, and that feeling was so strong. As we walked to dinner, it didn't start to fade like it always had. If anything, it felt stronger, and like it was growing. I think I don't really remember. I'm trying to, sort of project back, but I think it must have been a wild mix of feelings in me. Fear, maybe pride, lots of confusion. What's going on here? Am I like being possessed? What's happening? And Jeff and John took me under their wing when I went to tell them after dinner. They've been kind of hovering, they kind of said something's going on with Tim, And they concocted some kind of ritual to help me clear this. It involved water in this big bowl. I don't know what it all was. They were pretty clear about what they thought would be best. Maybe it helped. It was fading a little bit. But then I suddenly felt really concerned for everybody else. So I think I was in, when sometimes when you're really upset and you're kind of halfway back to normal, and you think you're back to normal, and then you go and do something. You know what I mean? You're half possessed by your emotions, and so I'm half possessed by sandwich spirits. So Zazen had already started, but I thought, I need to warn people. So I went into the Zendo, and during the silence of Zazen, in my altered state, in what I thought was a very calm, reasonable, simple voice, explained that if they had any weird feelings, they should probably get them checked out. Shamanic healers are standing by. You may now return to your normal Zazen program. This has been a message of the Emergency Spiritual Broadcasting Network. So, it was deep in Sesshin, and people were keeping the silence, and I did my thing, and sat down, and sat Zazen, and sat, walked Kinhin, sat Zazen. I think it was more or less calm enough that I could get to sleep eventually, but, I was pretty wired. I didn't feel so much the thing. And unbeknownst to me, a delegation of the elders had all gone to see Norman. And explained that Tim was now completely off the rails. Needed an intervention. And probably need to be relieved of his leadership responsibilities too. And I heard a little bit about this from a few of them. I think a few were too embarrassed to ever tell me about this conversation. Maybe some of them are here, so forgive me. But when I think Norman more or less said, sounds like Tim had a strong experience. Let's let him get a good night's sleep. And he is qualified to lead the Sesshin, so it'll be okay. He's expressed his trust. Sent them off to bed, And I don't think anyone really talked to me during like it was always a little party after, and people just kind of like, I don't know how to bring this up. I don't remember anybody talking to me. And then a couple of days later, the phone rang, and it was Norman. And that's unusual. He didn't usually call me. And he says, well, so probably we shouldn't do that ceremony anymore. And he explained, he thought about this. He explained, well, that might be important work for somebody to do. But our main purpose is to offer Zen Sesshin. So we don't want something else to disturb that too much. I think he said a little disturbance is okay, but not too much. And I somehow managed to suggest, I'm usually very compliant if anyone tells me I've been bad. I'm like, oh, I'm so sorry, but I kind of stayed in myself and said, well, yeah, I can see that. But I suggest, well, maybe a simpler ceremony. Can we try that? And he said, yeah, we could try that. And hung up the phone and then wrote the ceremony that we did yesterday. It's a lot quieter, Somehow, spatially, it's a safer space for us, although still relating to that other space. And I think very sincere. Didn't that feel very sincere to you? Feels good. I feel maybe a mild version of that somatic experience each year. Mostly I just feel grateful to have gone through that little journey, knowing like I still have so much to learn about all these things. And to have gone through that little journey in Sangha. They didn't kick me out. One person did call me and had to tell me in excruciating detail every little thing I'd said, what my tone of voice was. She said, I want you to get this. I'm like, okay, that's embarrassing. Oh. But of course, it was very sincere. I was doing my best. And we've tried, I was just talking about this with somebody, we've tried to reach out to the Sandwich Nation since, and they don't answer our calls now. And I figure they're like, yeah, we did the thing with those good folks. We're kind of busy with our lives. That's what I figure. They don't need to take care of us. And hopefully we're helping to take care of them in their sacred place by practicing here. But it's an interesting thing, isn't it, though? Like I was saying in the work circle yesterday, that Buddhism, as it moved through different cultures, and I know more about China and Japan, but I think all the cultures, always was responsive to the local understanding, to the spirits of each place, and would include them in nominally Buddhist rituals. Like, there's always a bit of a mashup. And that didn't make it across the Pacific so much. I don't know if that wasn't a big part of Suzuki Roshi's practice back home. Many of us have been to the temple he left from. Or if it just wasn't what he wanted to focus on, and really he didn't have much time, just a couple of years to plant this. He didn't know it, but just a couple of years. So he emphasized straight up Zen Buddhism, Zazen, simplified the ritual a little bit, kept the spirit settling Hungry Ghost ceremonies, because that's a part of the liturgical calendar. But each local place would have its own special ceremonies for that special place, and different figures and symbols on altars that relate to the particular spirits of that place. And they don't really seem to do that at Tassajara, the monastery he founded. There were a few native leaders, living on ranches and stuff nearby in the 60s, probably still are. They were friends of the community, but I don't remember offerings to the spirits of the Esalen people or earth altars or spirit altars there. Maybe I just didn't know about that. So that wasn't so much in our wheelhouse either. And yet, here at Samish, the kami, the spirits, brought it up, made themselves known to us. And we've done our best to respond. Maybe a little over the top at first, or maybe not. Maybe we've been too cautious. Who knows? But we've landed where we landed. And it's also up to each of us. It's up to each of us. Maybe that's my lesson to myself. It's like, you don't have to preach about this stuff. People have their own relationship to place, to heart, to spirit. And it's growing and changing in all of us all the time. So it's up to each of us to walk these grounds as sacred grounds. And maybe this is a place where it's somehow particularly a little bit easier to feel what's true everywhere. Right? What's true everywhere. Everywhere is a deeply spiritual, sacred place. And all we have is language and words, right? So the word spirit, it sounds like, Casper, the friendly ghost, so it's maybe not the perfect word, but there is no perfect word. Something beyond words, which we know is absolutely a part of our tradition. But the real reality is much bigger than our concepts about it. So I figured if I was telling the story of Sesshin, I shouldn't leave that out. I feel a little self-conscious using up most of a talk on it. And I probably won't talk about it again. But that happened. And I feel like I might get demerit if I don't do a little Buddhism. So let's do some Buddhism before we go. Want to stretch again? This is maybe not the best trend, You're Nomon added a stretch break. But actually, I did get a few times to practice with Japanese teachers who would talk for an hour and a half, so there is precedent. We watch all the elders falling asleep. A heavy Japanese accent helps too. Okay. So let's talk to Mr. Dogen. Great teacher, who is always trying to encourage us to see beyond our limited views. Dogen moved to the mountains, right? And hung out with mountain spirits. Let's look 4 for 4, Zoom people. Sorry. I was going to provide the handout online. I forgot again. It'll be in the email afterwards. But it's easy to find. You can find this online. This thing's slipping down again. So let's go to section 14. Which is on page 13. So now we're getting into relationality. People were mentioned a little bit before, but now they're this center of the focus. Great sages, wise people, ordinary people, and how we all relate to the mountains. So this requires another poem from Su Dong Po, I think, to make sense of. So set that aside, and I didn't put this poem in the booklet. So this is another really famous poem by, remember the one about the broad tongue and the 84,000 verses, remember that? Same poet. This poem's called Mount Lu. Regarded from one side, an entire range, from another, a single peak. Far, near, high, low, all its parts different from the others. If the true face of Mount Lu cannot be known, it is because the one looking at it is standing in its midst. It's actually a pretty simple poem. Regarded from one side, an entire range, from another, a single peak, far, near, high, low, all its parts different from the others. If the true face of Mount Lu cannot be known, it is because the one looking at it is standing in its midst. So we have trouble understanding the true face of reality, right? The true face of who we are. The Zen master says, show me your face before your parents were born, and you say, what? As conditioned beings, we're in the middle of it all, right? We're in the middle of our own mountains, and so we can't see the mountains. We're in the middle of our thoughts, our problems, our ideas, our reactions, our brilliance. We're in the middle of it all, so we can't see it very clearly. And this is not a problem. This is just where we are. This is where we practice. This is where practice realization arises. So it's not about getting out of it, I think that's where we start off. How do I get out of this mess, Well, maybe step one is you notice the mess. It's the problem with meditation, right? You notice the mess that your mind is. Step two, how do I get out of it? Step three, all right, it's not about getting out of it. Okay. And then we get to work. So here we are in the frame of separateness, feeling stuck. But little by little, as we practice, feeling the unbelievable potential right here in the middle of the stuckness. That in the middle of the stuckness is where complete freedom, flying in the clouds, right? Walking over water, walking mountains. That's where that is too. So I think what Dogen's going to try to show us here, or has been trying to show us, and everything Chris brought up is trying to show us, pumping out 70, 80 of these essays, over his lifetime, trying to show us that as we really live into this practice realization, this storehouse of potential experiences, this collection of stuff that we call me, the Alaya Vijnana that Chris was talking about, you actually start to realize it's not the way you thought it was. Or it transforms, same thing, just different words. That those were not weed seeds after all. So thank goodness you didn't start spraying weed killer in there. Those were Buddha jewels. This is Buddha, right here, and always has been. So in number 14 he says, mountains have the abode of great sages from a limitless past to the limitless present. Wise people and sages all have mountains as their inner chamber, as their body and mind. Because of wise people and sages, mountains are actualized. So we're right there already. We're the wise people and sages, living in the inner chamber of the mountains. And as Chris was saying so eloquently, reporting from Dogen, it's not ever a one-way street. We actualize the mountains as the mountains actualize us. Reality comes forward, and it's not like we're passive, we're meeting it, We're meeting it. It's in this meeting is our awakening, deep in the mountains. So he goes on to say, to remind us that, it's not about figuring it out, the next part here. You might think that in mountains, many wise people and great sages are assembled. But after entering the mountains, not a single person meets another. There is just the vital activity of the mountains. There is no trace of anyone having entered the mountains. So it's not about you, right? You're not trying to become a something. Study the ways to forget the self, right? He says that. You enter the mountains to realize, what are the right words? You were always in the mountains. You never left. You're not there. You are there. He says, let all that go, right? Don't be seeking for somebody to validate you, including yourself. That's what we really want, right? Well, if nobody, okay, again, nobody else is going to validate me, but if I practice long enough, I can validate myself, right? You know? Dogen says, no. It's okay. So he's very sympathetic, you know. It's hard to hear the sympathy at first when you read Dogen, but he's very sweet, actually. This next part, he knows that we're going to get tripped up by our delusions, right? So he's giving us now some coaching. This next little part, I think, is just coaching about our limited abilities here. Hang in there, he's telling us. Because when you see mountains from the ordinary world, and when you meet mountains while in the mountain's head and eye are viewed quite differently. Your idea or view, underline that, right? Idea or view of mountains not flowing is not the same as the view of dragons or fish. Human and heavenly beings have attained a position concerning their own worlds that other beings may doubt or may not have the capacity to doubt. So do not remain bewildered. Thanks, Toby. And skeptical when you hear the words, mountains flow. But study these words with Buddha ancestors. When you take up one view, you see mountains flowing. When you take up another view, mountains are not flowing. One time mountains are flowing in, another time they are not flowing. You do not fully understand this. You do not understand the true Dharma wheel of the Tathagata. So don't get stuck on any sides, right? This is an invitation to freedom. And I think implied in here is that he gets it. You might have to spend 30 years trying really hard to see it one way. Really, really hard. Because the other way didn't work. Mountains are not mountains and waters are not waters, right? Only to realize it wasn't about that all. It wasn't about having the right view. And the next part, I think, is Dogen's encouragement in the harsh package, which is nonetheless powerful encouragement. I think he's like, I really got to try to get this through your thick skull here. Listen up. An ancient Buddha said, so now he's really pulling out all the cards, right? This is from an ancient Buddha, not just me. An ancient Buddha said, if you do not wish to incur the cause for unceasing hell, do not slander the true Dharma wheel of the Tathagata. Carve these words on your skin, flesh, bones, and marrow, on your body, mind, and environs, on emptiness and on form. They are already carved on trees and rocks, on fields and villages. So, yes, we have our conditioned mixed up views. We do. But trust, Dogen's like, trust this process. Trust the practice. Trust practice realization. Or else. Or else. And it goes so deep you can carve it on emptiness and form, So throw out everything. Throw out everything. Make room for beyond even the teachings. Throw out form and emptiness too. And then maybe, because we're way over time, we'll stop at this next little bit, the beginning of part 15. These sections aren't in Dogen, they're created for the hiking retreat. It has to do with where we are in the landscape and stuff and how long we can change. But anyway. Because now, to really help us out after maybe freaking us out a little bit with the unceasing hell, it gives us love. It gives us love, so we'll stop on love. And some other time when I don't feel compelled to spend all my time talking about the history of the sandwich, I'll think about things to say about this beautiful sutra, or you can study it without me. Even better. So anyway, let's end with some love. Although mountains belong to the nation, mountains belong to the people who love them. When mountains love their master, such a virtuous sage or wise person enters the mountains. Since mountains belong to the sages and wise people living there, trees and rocks become abundant, and birds and animals are inspired. This is so because the sages and wise people extend their virtue. So it's about love in the end, and trust. Mountains are us, right? We are the mountains. We belong to love. And Dogen won't settle for us not being the virtuous sages and wise persons that we are. And that we need to fully express and understand this and practice this, no matter how long it takes, and how many bumps in the road, and how many times we get a little too much, or a little too little, or cause trouble. Not just for us, but for trees and rocks, and for birds and animals, to heal the world. So that's our charge. That's our purpose. So I feel just the same as Chris said yesterday. So privileged and lucky that I happen to be the one in the seat at the moment saying what we all already know. It's just karma, really. Any of us could express this in our own way. But it seems to be this body and mind at the moment, so thank you for your patience. In more way than one. I basically tried to do 2 Dharma talks every morning, so no wonder they got a little long. I hope on this first Sandwich Summer Sesshin without Norman, it seems useful and helpful to explore the history, how we got here, at least according to the one who happened to be sitting in the seat. Every one of us would have told a different story, for sure. But they would have all been the same story, actually. This is our story of awakening. No, we're not going to subjectively feel like we've got it. Thank goodness, If we did, then yeah, talk to Norman and organize an intervention. We'll never feel in that subjective way that our conditioned mind wants us to feel, like we're all completely okay and everything's fine, all that. It's not about that voice, right? It's about learning to listen to a deeper voice, the voice of the mountains and the waters, that has been whispering to us all night long, every night of our lives. 84,000 sutras. You are Buddha. You are okay. Please act like it. Please live into this. This isn't just something we receive, lucky us. It's something we have a responsibility to. So we'll do our best. Together. The love part's sure true too, isn't it? Don't you just love everybody here? And tomorrow we'll start talking, kind of fade, but we'll still know each other. It may just be kind of under the mountain for a minute.